for this first example, you're trying to find x, and whenever you see a picture like one of these where you have a large right triangle and then two smaller right triangles in it, you always want to be thinking Paap or Hllp. So the first thing you want to do is identify the situation, if it's going to be Paap or if it's going to be Hllp. And to do that, you're going to look. If you have something on the altitude, this is the altitude, that means you're going to be using Paap. And if you have something on one of the legs, so either this leg or this leg, that means you're going to be using Hllp. And when I say something, I mean maybe an x, a number, another variable. That's going to be how you determine. So in this case, since I have something on this leg, I'm going to be using Hllp. So Hllp stands for hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse over leg equals the leg over the part. The hypotenuse is the hypotenuse of the big right triangle. So the hypotenuse of this would be 8. So it's going to be 8 over the leg. And the leg always has to be the leg next to the part that you're going to use, or vice versa. So I'm always going to make sure that I'm using this part if I'm using this leg. And if I'm using this leg, then I need to use the 3. So leg will be x, and then it's always repeated in that diagonal, so x and x, and then the part is going to be 5. And remember, it makes that smiley face. That's kind of how you can remember. It's always the leg and the part adjacent to each other. From here, you're just going to cross multiply, so it'll be x squared equals 40. Square root both sides to solve for x. Let's break up the square root of 40. So if we break it up, biggest perfect square that goes into 40 is going to be 4. 4 times 10 gives me 40. So it's going to be x equals 2 radical 10. And remember, technically, when you square a square root, or when you square root a variable squared, it's technically plus or minus, but because we're talking about a side link, we just reject the negative case. Looking at example B, I need to first identify, is it Paap or Hllp? So when I look at this, I see something on the altitude, which tells me I'm going to be using Paap. So Paap stands for part 1 over altitude equals altitude over part 2. So this diagonal here will be the same number. These will be different. Those are the two parts. Doesn't matter which part you plug in first. So this is a part. So this is part 1 and this will be part 2. So part 1 will be x over the altitude is 10 equals 10 over part 2. Then we're going to cross multiply. When we cross multiply, it's important to think of this in parentheses because it's a binomial. So it's really going to be x times x plus 21 equals 10 times 10, 100. Hopefully you recognize this as a factoring problem, because what's going to happen, you're going to distribute this x and you're going to get x squared plus 21x equals 100. And from here, there's no way to solve it other than to factor or use one of your quadratic methods, like completing the square or quadratic formula. So what you need to do is I'm going to solve by factoring, so I'm going to bring that 100 over to the other side. And then you need to find numbers that are going to add to 21 but multiply to negative 100. So this is where we can set up our x factor. So 21 negative 100. So it's add, multiply. Remember, in the calculator, you can use menu and then 3, 3, 1. And that'll get you the solutions. And then for the factors, you just flip the signs. So if you use this, make sure you flip signs. Flip 4 factors. So when you do that, you're thinking of numbers that add to 21 multiplied to negative 100. I should have opposite signs because I'm multiplying to a negative. Bigger number should be positive since I'm adding to a positive. So we get 25 and negative 4 are going to multiply to negative 100 and add to 21. So when you go to write this, it'll be x plus 25, x minus 4 equals 0. And then to solve it, you split it down the middle, set each piece equal to 0. So we get x equals negative 25, x equals 4 when you solve each of those individually. Then you ask yourself if both make sense. Well, if we plug in a negative 25 for part 1, that means we have a negative length. So that means we're going to reject this one. So reject, because can't have a negative length. Have a negative length. and then we're going to keep x equals 4 because that would make sense.